In order to get started showing you a little bit more in depth about classes and how they work and some of the things that we gain from their functionality, I want to get started writing a Java applet or a Java program. Java's like I said in previous videos, Java's probably the best language to start with learning if you don't already know a language. Because you can write a Java application that actually runs on all the different operating systems out there. In the last video, we went through how to install Eclipse. In this video, we're going to actually create an application or a program in Eclipse. Again, I'm running on Linux, but it really doesn't matter what operating system you happen to be using. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. So we're going to go to File, New Project, and actually I want to do a File, New Java project, and we're just going to name it, and we're going to name this training-001. I'm going to use the default location. I'm just going to leave everything pretty much set the way it is, and then we're just going to tell it to finish. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a package, and I'm going to explain exactly what a package is here in just a minute. I want to get the project actually created first, and then I'll go back and explain to you exactly what we're doing. So we're just going to say this is package 1, and it doesn't like numbers in the name, so we're just going to say, I'll tell you what, let's just call this our first package. All right, so now we have our first package, and that's kind of funny because it actually looks like it created package 1. Let's delete this. And Eclipse is not the most bug-free program in the world, but so now we have our first package sitting here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to actually start creating our classes now. Now Java cannot operate without classes. The entire programming language is based around having packages, and that includes even the very first thing that we do. So we're going to come in here and tell it to create a new class. And when we create this, we're going, you notice it's in our package, and I am going to create a new name here. We'll just say this is our class 1. It's going to be a public class. I do want to have it create the main function and the constructor. Now, in a previous video, I mentioned that all programming languages have to have a main entry point in order for them to operate. This is me telling the system that I want this class that I'm creating to be my main entry point, and I want it to have our main function in it so that Java knows what function to call first to get this program kicked off and running. So we're just going to go ahead and tell it to finish that. And so this gives us our main function. Now you'll notice that this is a public function, which means we can call it from anywhere. It's static void main. This is just, and I'm not going to get into all the detail on this. This is just what Java sets up to be the main class that gets called when you run an application. Now what I have done here is I have entered a system.out. System is a class that you have access to from pretty much anywhere in Java, and it has a function called out.println, and we've added the hello 1 to the thing, and we could change this to hello world and make it say anything you want. So now here is one key thing. If I get ready to run this this program, you'll notice up here that I've got to save. You see this asterisk beside the file name. Before I can actually run this program or run this file, I have to save, hitting Control S or Control Shift S to save an entire project. But you've got to remember to save your files before you can actually run. Now let's get into a little bit of detail here as to what exactly I'm doing. And to do that, I don't know if this is going to actually work, but let's try. Let's see if I can, nope. So let's do this. Let me try, whoops. I have completely goofed up here. I want to run you. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to explain to you exactly what all of this stuff is doing. So the first thing that we have here is we have our first package. Now, you can think of packages as a group of files that I'm telling the system that I want to have all related together. Now, the reason that you do this is we want to, instead of going out and having a bunch of different things inside of our class, what we want to do, or inside of a file, what we want to do is we want to come out, like I was describing in an earlier video, we want to come out and say that this is going to be our class and it's going to have our main function in it. So that's our main class. And then we're going to create a new class, another class. We're going to put it in a completely different file, and we're going to say that this is our numbers class. So we can call it anything we want. And yes, I did write that wrong. So this is going to be our numbers class. And then we're going to come in and we're going to create another file, and we're going to make that be our graphics class, or whatever it is that we happen to have for our particular application. Now, what we're doing here, if you think about it, if I gave you the task of keeping track of all of the receipts, for example, for a company, you're not going to just take all those receipts and throw them into a box, and then when I come back and say, hey, I need the receipt for XYZ, you're going to have to go dig through all of those receipts, an entire box of stuff, to try to find what you're looking for. It would take forever. There's no organization there, and you'd probably get fired when your boss sees what you've done. Programming is no different. We have to organize all of our things into groups. So here we have specific files that are going to do specific things, and then we are going to have our group. All of this is basically our package. So by grouping all of this stuff together, we're able to very quickly go in and find the specific section of code that we're looking for, and another programmer that comes in and tries to pick up the thing, he can kind of hopefully understand how you have everything organized, and can very easily go in and figure out what needs to be done, and where they need to look next for whatever it is that they happen to be doing. So it's very important to group your code in a way that people can actually go in and understand, you know, what you were thinking when you actually went in to do something. So the next thing, and that kind of explains your packages, and we're going to create another class here before we quit to show what is going on. The next thing is public. As we talked about earlier, public tells us that we can call this from outside of the class. This tells it that we are actually defining a new class, and this is the name of the class. Now, by default, in some programming languages, you would do, you know, a colon and parent, or whatever the parent class you were going to inherit from. But in Java, it will default to being the parent object class, so you don't have to actually put that in. Now, the next thing we have is our first method, or our first function. It's a public function. Now notice that this looks just like that. That's because this function is called a constructor. And if you remember, when we created the class, I told it to create a constructor. Now, what is a constructor? A constructor is basically, when we create this instance of the class, this function gets called automatically and gets called instantly as soon as we create the instance of this class. So it is a way for me to go in and initialize variables and to do all kinds of other things. So you don't always have to have a constructor. It's usually a good idea to have one. And then you can also create destructors to go in and clean things up after you destroy a class if you need to. In Java, it's not so necessary, because you do have you know, a garbage collecting system that actually cleans up a lot of your variables and stuff. The next thing is this function, and this is, again, public. And then static void, this is the return type. This is telling the system that this function is not going to return anything. So when you call it, you're not going to set var1 equal to main, because nothing is going to come back from calling this particular function. So this doesn't work when you have void. Void just says, I'm going to write a function, but I am not going to go in here and put a return statement in it because it is not going to return anything. Static, I'm not going to get into, but it has to do with the way this function is called and the way it works with the system. Now, because this is our main function, this is going to be the first function that gets called when our program loads. The static has to do with that, and I'll explain this later. I don't want to get into it now. So the next thing that we have here is our system out print line. Now all we're doing here is actually calling a print routine to print some text. So it's not really a big deal what we're doing. So let's run our application. So what we're going to do now, we've got the file saved, and we're going to come up here and run our application, and you see down here it says hello world. So all we did is we printed hello world. Now in an earlier video I was trying to explain to you how you create different classes and how you have to create an instance of that class and so forth. Because this is our first class that we're creating, it is actually created on the fly for us. So we do not have to actually create this class when we go in to do this. But what we're going to do next is actually create our own class, and we're going to work with it next. So what we're going to do is go over here to our package. We're going to tell it to create another new class, and we're going to call this class 2. It's in our package. We're going to leave it set to default to public. We're not going to set main because we don't want a main. We may want to do a constructor. In this class I'm not going to do one. And then we're just going to tell it to finish. So now we have class 2. Now what I want to do is we're going to write some functions in here. So we're going to say that we've got a variable called J that is a class variable, and we're going to write a function, and we're going to say it's a public function, and it's called add numbers, and we're going to pass in an int called I and an int called J, and then we're going to set up our function. Oop. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to do in this function for the moment is we're going to put in hello 1 just to show you that this thing is getting called. So, and I'm hitting the save button here. Now I also need to tell it that we're not going to return anything from that function. So this, you do need to put void if you're not going to actually return. Now in our case, when we're done here, we're actually going to put a return, which means that we're going to have to tell it what type of thing we're going to return. For right now, I just want to test this to see if we can get this to work. So right now we have our package. So both of these classes are inside of our package, and you can see them over here on the left in our browser. So we got both of these inside of our package. We have class 2 here. We've got class 1 here. But what I want to do is right after we tell it to say hello world, we are going to create an instance of class 2. Well, class 2 is of type class 2, and we're going to say C2 is our variable name. And we're going to set that equal to a new instance of class 2. So what we have done is we have told the system to go out and create a new variable that is going to be, instead of a type int, we've told it that it's actually going to be a type of our class that we were going to create. And then in Java, and this is different in different programming languages, but in Java, to create a new instance of something, you use the new keyword and then the type of that class or whatever it is you're using. Now, you'll notice over here that it's telling me that I've declared C2, but I'm not using it. It's just a warning to let me know that I may be wasting some processing time doing something I don't need to be doing. Now, what we want to do, though, is we want to actually call C2 dot, and you'll notice here that we have our functions showing up. So there is the function that we actually wrote earlier over in our other class, and then it needs 2 variables. It needs I and J. Well, we're just going to pass in a 2 and a 3. Again, remember that we're not actually adding numbers yet. We're going to do that next. So right now we've created an instance, so we'll add a comment here, create instance. And then right here we are okay. So just to recap here, we have class 2. We have a function called add numbers. It takes 2 parameters. It's not returning anything yet, but we're going to do that in a minute. And then we're calling, we create an instance. So C2 is our instance. Class 2 is our blueprint. Then we create a new instance. So now we actually have created a car for our previous example. And now we're calling open door or whatever it happens to be for that particular object. So this is our object, this is our instance, and we're calling that. Now, what we're going to do first is I'm going to run this, and you'll see that it called hello world, and then it printed hello 1. Well, hello 1 came from out of here. Well, now let's make this thing actually do something. So I'm going to change this to an int. So now I'm telling it this is not a void function, which means that I have to put a return here. And then we want to create a new record here, or a new field. So we're going to say, in fact, let's do this. Let's create sum up here. So we're telling it that sum is going to be an instance variable and that it is going to be private. So you can't call this from outside. And I'm also going to create another thing called total. And I'm doing this so that you can see how this works in just a second. So let's get this, and we're going to come right here, and we're going to say sum equals I plus j. And then we are going to return the sum. Okay? Now what we need to do is we need to come over here, because now we're actually going to be returning something. So we're going to declare a new int called sum, and we're going to make it equal the return value of that. And then we're going to tell it system.out.println sum. Okay, so in theory, what we're doing here is we're creating our class instance. We're setting sum equal to this. And remember from our previous conversations that this is a variable that only has scope inside of this main function. So this sum is not the same thing as this class variable sum field. They're two different things. Now, I'm going to run this real quick. And you see we have hello world. We called our function, and then we printed out the sum of 2 plus 3. Okay? Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to come right here, and I want to try to print out, if we look back over here, we have 2 class variables. We have one called sum and one called total. And just to do this, so what I want to do is I want to put a dot here, and we want to try to print out sum, or I'm sorry. We're not going to print out this sum. We're going to print out C2 dot, and then notice there is no dot sum. So when I'm trying to use the instance of this variable, because I declared this as private, I do not have access to that variable over here in the instance. But you'll notice that I do have access to total. So total is part of this class, and I do have access to it. So I could come down here just to kind of show you how this works. Instead of having this return something, I could just do this and say it is void. I'm not going to return anything at all, but I want to set total equal to sum when I'm done. Okay, so what I've just done is now over here we're not going to do this. We're going to get rid of our new variable that we created over there. But when I get ready to print out the total, I'm going to actually get the total field from the class. So that's a public field, and we're setting that to be our total. So you can see that I've eliminated the need to have a variable getting defined inside of here, inside of our main function, and I'm just letting the class variable take care of whatever I need to show. So I've got a little bit of control over what's going on. So I'm going to clear this, and we're going to rerun the code. And you see we get the exact same result. Now, the point here is not to confuse you with doing this multiple different ways, but there is no one way to write a software program. You can write it 100 different ways. The difference between a really good developer and one that just writes code is that the good developer is going to be thinking about how much memory he's taking up, how fast the program's running, keeping everything as small as it possibly can be and as compact as it can be and as organized as it can be, so that it's easy to work on, easy to debug, and easy to deal with. And also, obviously, that the user experience is as fast and fluid as it can be. So don't take this as a, we have to do this the way that I'm showing you how to do it on the screen. There's 1,000 different ways to accomplish exactly what we just went over here in this video. But hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of how we're organizing our classes, how we're creating different instances of those classes, and then how we're working with the different things. And in the next video, I'm going to actually create multiple instances of this class too, and we'll expand on what its capabilities are.